Have you ever noticed that your iPhone has two completely different ways to answer a phone call? Sometimes you get a red or a green button to answer or decline, but other times those buttons disappear completely and you're left with just one option, slide to answer. So why does Apple do this? Is this just a weird iPhone design choice? Actually, there's pretty clever reason behind it, and it all goes down way back to the early days of iPhone. So let's break it down. When your iPhone is unlocked and you're actively using it, an incoming call usually appears on the small banner on the top of the screen, with an option to answer or decline. And if the call takes over the screen, you can still get those familiar red and green buttons. But when the iPhone is locked, things change. Instead of giving you two buttons, Apple shows you the famous slide to answer control. And there's a very simple reason to this. Accidental touches. Think about what happens when your phone is in your pocket. You pull it out, the screen wakes up, your finger touches the display, and suddenly you could accidentally tap answer. Or even worse, you could accidentally decline an important call. Apple wanted to make that much harder to do. A button only requires a quick tap, but a slider requires you to intentionally touch the screen and drag your finger across it. That makes it much likely that something happens accidentally. And this idea actually isn't unique to incoming calls. It comes from one of the most recognizable features on the original iPhone, slide to unlock. When the first iPhone launched in 2007, touchscreen was still relatively new to most people. And there was a problem. A touchscreen doesn't need much pressure to register an input. So if your phone was sitting in your pocket, bag, or even pressed against something, the screen would potentially register touches. And there was another problem that existed long before the iPhone: accidental dialing, or known as butt dialing. Basically, your phone would accidentally call someone while sitting in your pocket, and it was surprisingly common. So Apple introduced slide to unlock as a physical gesture that required deliberate movement instead of a simple tap. You couldn't just accidentally touch the screen or unlock the phone. You actually had to slide your finger across the display.
And to unlock the phone, I just take my finger and slide it across. Alright, you want to see that again? Basically, we wanted something that you couldn't do by accident in your pocket, and just slide it across, boom.
And Apple eventually applied the same idea to incoming calls. In the early versions of iOS, incoming calls were handled differently. The original iPhone and the first few versions of iOS used the familiar red and green buttons. But Apple eventually realized that having easy to tap buttons on a locked phone wasn't ideal. People could accidentally answer or reject calls, and sometimes they weren't even trying to interact with the phone. They were simply reaching into their pockets to see who was calling. So with iOS 6, Apple introduced a slide to answer interface for locked iPhones, and that's basically the system we become familiar with. But here's where it goes little confusing. If there's only a slide to answer option, how do you actually decline the call? There's no obvious option anywhere on the screen. Well, Apple hides it behind the physical buttons. If you want to silence the incoming call, press the side button once. But if you want to decline the call completely, press the side button twice. And because Apple doesn't want to put a giant decline button on the screen, a lot of people doesn't even realize this is possible. So essentially your iPhone is using two different interfaces for the same reason, preventing accidental actions. When you are actively using your phone, Apple assumes you are intentionally interacting with it. So buttons are convenient. But when your phone is locked, Apple assumes it could be sitting in your pocket, inside a bag, or being picked up. So instead of a simple tap, Apple requires a deliberate swipe. And what's interesting is that this tiny decision is actually part of a much bigger idea behind the original iPhone: make accidental interactions as difficult as possible. And even today, this philosophy still exists in different parts of iOS. So the next time your iPhone suddenly switches from two buttons to a slider when someone calls you, you know exactly why. It's not random. Apple is basically making sure you don't accidentally answer your boss while your iPhone is sitting in your pocket. And honestly, that's probably a good thing. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and share. And don't forget to subscribe to Visex for more interesting tech stories and latest tech updates. And for even more tech content, make sure to follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.